Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar fan commentary track video. This one's going to be for Book 3 Fire Episode 8, The Puppetmaster. I continue to suggest other episodes of Avatar and Korra for me to do in the comment section below, but if you want to set up your copy of the episode to sync up with this commentary track, have it ready to go at the start, including the introduction of this episode, whether that be your Blu-ray copy, DVD copy, Netflix, online stream, whatever. I'm going to stop this sort of introduction to the video in just a little bit, then there'll be about 10 seconds with no audio, just 10 seconds of silence, and when I start speaking again after that pause, that's when I'm going to hit play on the episode, that's when you should hit play, and we should be synced up at that point. So, bringing the introduction of the video to an end, after the pause coming up, when you hear me speak again, hit play and we should be synced up. Okay, so here we are with 308, The Puppetmaster. I have this one rated at, I think, the number 31 slot on my list, which may seem relatively low for an episode like this. I know some people rate this episode very highly. Some people kind of, I think, put it where it needs to be, which is around where I rate it, as being just like, not quite one of the absolute best episodes, but just sort of below that. This is a very interesting one in the sense that, like, it's not an episode I really have any problems with. It literally just highlights that Avatar has a lot of very high quality episodes that up to and beyond like 30 episodes of the series, like, you're in the super high tier. About the only thing I'd level at this episode as a reason I don't place it too highly is because this episode is more of a focus on Hama herself rather than any of the other characters, any of our main characters. Yes, it's a Katara episode, but there are more important Katara episodes. I would say The Painted Lady is a more Katara-centric episode than this one, in the sense that Katara learns stuff from Hama in this episode, and it introduces bloodbending, but the character arc of Katara is more covered in The Painted Lady. It's more hit home, like that is the Katara episode in The Southern Raiders. Not to take anything away from this episode, it's just that it's more of a side episode in terms of this is a world building episode to explain to us the sort of history of the raids on the Southern Water Tribe, which is great backstory, but the focus, like I said, is on Hama as like the main takeaway from the episode. And so I love this, just a group telling scary stories to each other. Sokka, now with the sword, is obsessed with telling stories about like haunted swords and stuff like that. And then Katara jumps into a very sort of frightening story from the Southern Water Tribe. Nini. And you sort of wonder, like, oh, I'd like to see them come back to this and maybe explain something about this. Like, is there a spiritual element to this maybe, or is it literally just a tragedy that they've turned into more of a big story? And yeah, it's about Kaya. Nini. Katara's Nini voice is so creepy. I sort of wonder, like, wow, what is the like history of this thing? What's the situation here? Empty house. Is it just like a story sort of made up to scare kids about to not go out into the snow, like the tundra, and get frozen, or what? And then this is great setup here from Toph. They think it's a story, but that plays into the idea of it is the people Hama has been holding captive from the Fire Nation all these years. That's really good, that like you have to watch the episode a second time to realize that that is set up for a reveal that's happening later on. And here's Hama. And like straight away, like this is sort of our kind of Halloween episode. I think it aired in October. Um, Starting off with scary stories, set at night time, and then we introduce one of the more sort of horrific in a way bending abilities in terms of just how like wrong it is in a way. Kind of the creepy old lady sort of dynamic here with Hama. And then here we go. Interesting, Hama sort of talking about the stories of herself, you know, that there's rumors about when the full moon is out, something goes wrong, and she's behind it all, that she brings it up first. And I like how she focuses on these kids. She's actually like nice to them because she is aware that they're clearly not Fire Nation. That is specifically she's aware that, like, you know, two of the group are from the Water Tribe, and that's why she's like nice to them. And doesn't try and do what she does to everyone else initially, I suppose, to them. And I like that they set up that like Hama and Katara are getting on like immediately. It makes it be like, oh cool, here's this nice dynamic, this is so important to Katara meeting another Southern Master, and then they turn it on its head. And so it's all the more sort of tragic in a way of like, this could have been like Katara's second master, but it's now this sort of dark history in a way that that Katara has to deal with going forward as like, I suppose, you know, the second person in the world who like knows bloodbending type thing or whatever. And they all think it's sort of a spiritual thing, and like Angus the Avatar is going to deal with it. Little do they know, the problem is right in front of them. Sokka sensing something's going on, and she plays into it a little bit. And like, I like the setup here of like that she's hiding something, and the reveal is like, oh, she's Water Tribe, and then there's this other sense of like, oh, she's hiding something even beyond that. And Katara's like, oh no, I fully trust her. I can get behind her. She has reason to be sort of suspicious of us, just as we do of her. And I like this. This is kind of the return of Detective Sokka in a way. A bit more serious here than Avatar Day, but still, you know, definitely a character trait you'd associate with him. The use of like, okay, there's actual puppets. Kind of makes you wonder, like, oh wait, does that just studying like actual puppetry sort of assist with, you know, controlling actual bloodbending or what? And then I love this setup here of just the locked box, and Sokka seems to be the only one really like focused on it. And right as it's about to open, they're all just like, yeah, we really want to know as well. I love him just opening the lock by like jamming his sword in the keyhole. But yeah, clever use of metal bending here, and Toph's meteorite bracelet. The easiest to kind of mold metal. And yeah, here it is. Katara's about to leave, and then it's open. Boom. And here we go. The big reveal. She's Water Tribe. And specifically, Southern Water Tribe. And that is a kind of interesting one, because it is this emotional thing of, because she was captured and just barely escaped, that's all she has in terms of an object from her previous life. It's just herself, her skills, and that comb. And yeah, she was preparing a southern dinner for them, but ocean kumquats. And I was just like, ugh, no. I was like, okay, that explains a lot of things. And I immediately kind of moved to like, oh, she's Southern Water Tribe. Let's trust her. Let's go ahead here. This usually works in their favor, them meeting someone who seems to also sort of be anti-Fire Nation, but in this case it's different. She is anti-Fire Nation, it's just kind of like the Jet style of anti-Fire Nation, where it's like, oh, you're taking it way too far. The people you're angry at, you are not attacking the people you're angry at, you're attacking just innocent people of the Fire Nation. And yeah, here we go, she is a waterbender. And this is a big moment for Katara to see another, Southern Waterbender, knowing what her bending means to her, as we learn in 316. And here we go. This backstory, I think, is very good, highlighting that this is what the Southern Water Tribe was like all those years ago. And this is the start of the raids on the south. The Fire Nation, realistically, as we see from the season 1 finale, it is a huge struggle to attempt to attack the north because of the natural ice defenses. It's easier to attack the south because, one, it's not as big, but also it doesn't have those defenses. And this is like, obviously, Azulon's era of like, okay, we have to assume the air avatar has reincarnated. We'll switch our attention to the water tribes. One, because of the war. That explains the Fire Nation ship in their tribe from the earlier episodes. But yeah, like, this makes sense for them to be like, it takes the one of the water tribes out of the war, and also potentially assists in the search for the Avatar. And we see that they make sure that what waterbenders are out of the south by returning later to make sure any more that are born are also kind of removed from action. But yeah, we saw Kana back there. And she doesn't answer those questions, but it's key to how she answers, of course, as we see. And it's a heavy backstory, and I think it really works to help explain that history of, like, it wasn't just one raid that did that. It was sort of these consistent ones every so often to get rid of all the waterbenders that did it. Highlighting the importance of, keeping the skill set going. So this is Katara, who's primarily a sort of northern style bender, going to learn some of the southern style moves, and specifically the skills for a waterbender outside of their natural environment. And I like the reference here to the desert of, like, that was when she had so little water. They reference, of course, the runaway and so on, the sweat. But here's I suppose the plant bending, what she learned for the Foggy Swamp tribe, taken to its next level. Water from the atmosphere. And you immediately see that sort of lethal edge almost to her moves. Katara's just happy to see a Southern Master kind of like showing her moves, but there's that like, whoa, that's a pretty impressive maneuver. UA reference. Makes sense, Ultimately, if the moon is the power behind bloodbending, referencing the moon, it's an interesting dynamic. You need to be at your most powerful as a waterbender to do bloodbending, to connect with the water within people's bodies. Old Man Ding. And then here we go. Fire lilies. And this is cool because, like, it obviously highlights that, like, a waterbender can be very powerful in very green environments as well. But you do have to sacrifice the plant life to do it, unless you control the plants, like a Hue. And Hama has the do what you must to survive. And Katara thinks that comes from a place of, like, we're the only two waterbenders left. But it ultimately comes from a much darker place for Hama. Two master waterbenders. I was just like, yeah, waterbender in the full moon? What do we have to be scared about? That's when we're at our most powerful. Little do they know that's the key to it all. This is just your kind of quintessential old man voice here. I always like Old Man Ding here. His story and how dramatic it gets. Moon monster. And they're like, oh no, it's not a spirit. Like, he just was possessed and started moving himself off towards the mountain. Which is where Toph heard the voices. The people under the mountain. My last glimpse of life. And yeah, the power of the moon faded. Bloodbending couldn't be effective anymore. Because of course Hama is not a psychic bloodbender like Amon, Tarlok and Yakone. And yeah, the start comes back here. And you have a plot for the rest of the characters here while Katara is right next to Hama. And I like the setup here of, like, they discover what's going on as, you know, Hama's just about to explain bloodbending to Katara, and you realize, like, Katara's next to the last person she wants to be next to here. It's like so creepy, the veins. And it's just like, oh no. She's the one behind all the stuff going on with the moon. And it's a great setup of just like the Yakone story of, like, he does all of his stuff at times when there isn't a full moon, but using bloodbending. Hama is the reverse example of someone who did stuff when there was the full moon. And look at the amount of people she basically had imprisoned themselves, just used that bending to control them and move them into this imprisonment. And here's the full reveal. The innkeeper. And ultimately, that is a good move. Like, I suppose Toph being controlled by bloodbending is not something you want. And here we go. The terrible conditions the waterbender prisoners were kept in. Dry air, just barely enough water to survive. Like, constantly bound, and like they have to drink like that. It's just insane. And so just being imprisoned when she's at her most powerful, you know, she can do this. It's such a dark story, but it makes sense as the origin for the technique. How she can escape from prison. And again, just the sound effects, the way the motion is shown, just a jerky motion, and just they let her free. She forces them to let her free. She just walks out. And of course, Katara doesn't like that idea. Taking someone's kind of will away from someone, that's the problem with it. And it's that idea of like, should you hate the entire nation for basically what the military and the leadership did? That it is that kind of Jet point of view, which I do like the continuity of like Katara basically having the dynamic with Jet. It basically coming up in this episode, and then also Aang mentioning it in the Southern Raiders. Of just that pure hatred is not the path you want to go down. And all Hama wants to do at this point is to force Katara to bloodbend. And the second Katara uses the technique, she has her. Hama has won, has accomplished what she wants to do. You know, that the technique has been passed on, will survive beyond her, just by the fact that someone else has done it. But yeah, just complete control even over Katara. But as we see here, you know, this is Katara with the power of the full moon, and now the emotions as well. Highlighting that Katara is a kind of more naturally powerful waterbender in this case. That she can break through the grip. And you can see the waterbending kind of counter moves there. Hama being very destructive to the environment. But Katara just in the water-to-water exchanges just being able to really, you know, dominate here. But yeah, them arriving actually is worse, because now they're sort of ammunition for Hama to use. And this is the true sort of power of bloodbending. Yeah, it was a nice defensive move from Hama. Yeah, Katara just trying to do this without injuring people as little as possible. And here we go. What's the only way to stop her from having the two kill each other is to bloodbend the bloodbender. And it's how she ultimately stops Hama here, but it gives Hama exactly what she wants. And this is the part of the episode that is really, really well done. It highlights that Katara's bloodbending grip is more powerful than Hama's. Just highlighting the higher potential. But here we go. And just leaving her with that of just like, she's going away to prison again. But just, you know, look at what you are now. Look at what Katara was like forced to do. And it's a great use of like just, I suppose, ultimately one of your more minor villains, but incorporating all this Southern Water Tribe backstory into it. The introduction of what becomes probably one of the most, in a way, like fondly remembered unique techniques in Avatar, especially with what they do with it in Korra Book 1 and expanding on it so perfectly with the Akon family. I think it works so well, especially with the idea that we know that it becomes part of sort of, the history, the laws of Republic City, that bloodbending is an outlawed technique, that it is a crime to bloodbend, and Katara is essential to making that a law. Because I suppose realistically, even though you can maybe say that, like, oh well, only Hama and Katara know it, eventually, as I suppose just bending naturally evolves over time, people are going to realize that, this is something that is possible to bloodbend within people and so on, and to bend the water within people. So it has to become more public, so that to make people aware that this is something that waterbenders can do during the full moon, you have to make it sort of public knowledge that this is something that is possible, to make it able to be sort of policed in a way. And that must have been a tricky thing for Katara to realize how to, handle that effectively. How much information do you give, versus would it actually be better just to not talk about it and then just react if anyone else does discover bloodbending? But that's just the tricky thing, of course, and that's where, as we see, the discovery of bloodbenders who can do it without the full moon is such a huge thing. It's just such a controlling ability, especially when you have naturally incredibly powerful benders like Yakone, Tarlok, and Amon, who aren't just, very strong sort of master level benders like a Hama or a Katara, but are these special benders who are powerful enough to have this unique ability, that their bloodbending grip is going to be so much more powerful because their whole special technique is based in that. And that's what's so interesting about that family, and why it is ultimately like one of the most powerful abilities in all of Avatar, that is only really surpassed by the Avatar state and very, very powerful spirits. So, it's very, very strong. But yeah, like I said, it's a fun episode in the sense of Katara learns about the Southern style from Hama, and so she does grow from this episode in terms of now she knows Northern style, the core aspects of Southern style. A lot of the techniques she learns here are more about how to be a waterbender outside of sort of typically watery environments, so incorporating more of the Foggy Swamp style into it. So she has like aspects of like every single place that there is waterbending effectively. She knows and has experienced all of those different styles. So she's such a well-read or traveled waterbender just because of that. And that's something you can't really say about a lot of the other waterbenders in the series, is that they have that experience of like all of the different aspects of waterbending, whereas she does have that, and that's something that is accomplished. But it is, I think, ultimately more of a setup episode for the Southern Raiders when she does use bloodbending again. And it's meant to get across that Katara being in an emotional enough state to use bloodbending highlights her own rage and her own, issues of, I suppose, becoming a little bit like Hama. Hama targeting innocent people in the Fire Nation, and what lengths is Katara going to go to get her revenge? And that's well set up, but it's more resolved later on. As I said, this one ultimately is more about Hama, about the technique itself and the history. So it feels a little bit more like, an Avatar Day style episode, where you remember the episode for the Kyoshi backstory, Chin the Conqueror style stuff, a Cave of Two Lovers style episode, where you've got the fun stuff going on. It's not particularly plot or character focused, but you have that world building aspect of the Oma and Shu story, introduction of Badger Moles. That's what you get from this. Like a lot of the episodes that aren't plot focused, they give you world building, whether that be through backstory, history, or techniques in this case. But still, really, really strong episode. There's nothing really to complain about with this one. People remember this episode very, very heavily because bloodbending was always, talked about as a potential thing in the fandom when you take all of the elements to their sort of scientific maximum degree. Theoretically, this should be possible for a bender of this, and people had speculated about bloodbending, and here we got it sort of delivered on, and it's one of the most memorable ones from here on out, and that's the legacy of this episode, basically. So yeah, in the comments let me know what your thoughts were on this episode, but that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.